One of the Manchester synagogue terror attack victims appears to have been shot by police, Greater Manchester Police has said. Let's cross live to Crompsall and speak to GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, can you bring us up to date on this new breaking news?
I can indeed. We've just heard that in the last few minutes from Greater Manchester Police as they've issued that latest update that, as you rightly say there, they believe that one of the victims deceased yesterday was accidentally shot by a Greater Manchester Police armed officer as they tried to bring an end to that terrorist attack. And I've got a statement here from Chief Constable Stephen Watson, and he said the Home Office pathologist has advised that he is provisionally determined that one of the deceased victims would appear to have suffered a wound consistent with a gunshot injury. It is currently believed that the suspect, Jihad al-Shami, was not in possession of a firearm, and the only shots fired were from GMP's authorised firearm officers as they worked to prevent the offender from entering the synagogue and causing further harm to our Jewish community. It follows, therefore, that subject to further forensic examination, this injury may sadly have been sustained as a tragic and unforeseen consequence of the urgently required action taken by my officers to bring an end to bring this vicious attack to an end. We've also been advised by medical professionals that one of the 3 victims currently receiving treatment in hospital has also suffered a gunshot wound, which is mercifully not life-threatening. It's believed that both victims, so the victim still in hospital and the victim that has been deceased, were close together behind the synagogue doors as worshippers acted bravely to prevent the attacker from gaining entry. So that is the latest update from Greater Manchester Police, that one of the 2 men who sadly died in that attack yesterday was, we now believe, and we understand from Greater Manchester Police, did receive a gunshot wound from a Greater Manchester Police firearm officer as they deployed their weapons in order to try and bring an end to that attack. Of course, we know security and worshippers behind the doors of Heaton Park Synagogue were bravely barricading the doors in order to try and prevent that attacker from getting inside. Stephen Watson praising them yesterday for their bravery, which we now know could well have saved many more lives. But unfortunately, of course, and tragically, one of those men behind the door received a gunshot wound as Greater Manchester Police tried to end that attack that unfortunately ended his life.
Sophie Reaper, thank you for bringing us up to date on that. And we have on the line now the journalist Angela Epstein. Angela, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Some breaking news in the last few minutes that some of the victims may have actually died from the police firearms officer not having been stabbed by the attacker as previously thought. A terrible time for the Jewish community in the UK.
It's absolutely horrifying. Even though we've talked of nothing else since the news broke yesterday morning, it's still very hard to process. Just to give you some context, this is the synagogue of my childhood. It was my family's synagogue, so I spent many, many times there, sitting in services or scampering around outside. And I also got married there. It's in the heart of the Manchester Jewish community, so it's not far from where I live. And I was awoken yesterday morning by the sound of helicopters circling overhead, very low, above us in the sky. And as I walked sort of through the street down the road to see what was going on, the place was thronged with police and security people. And it was just complete anathema to the kind of day that we'd all been expecting. It was Yom Kippur, as many people know now, the Day of Atonement, and the most solemn and holiest day of the Jewish calendar. So now to hear that, well, we heard fairly early on that people had been killed, and that now we sort of, it was killed in the whole chaos of it all, is just so impossibly difficult to process.
Angela, I was deeply disturbed by many images I saw last night of protesters, so-called protesters, out on the streets in major cities across the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister pledged to protect Jewish people. He said he would do everything he could, yet in London there were 40 people arrested for participating in a pro-Gaza march last night. Do you think the Prime Minister is holding up his end of the deal here to protect Jewish people?
I think the Prime Minister's a joke. This is a man who campaigned twice for Jeremy Corbyn to become leader of this country. So make no mistake about where his loyalties originally lay. He's a weather vane prime minister who turns towards where he feels his political skin is more likely to be saved. The moment that he recognised the Palestinian state without it being contingent upon the release of the hostages or the disarming of Hamas was a terrible day for the Jewish community, because it was seen as a reward for terrorism, as witnessed by Hamas releasing a statement saying the recognition of that state was the fruit of October the 7th. For him now to come down the road from me and pay due respect to what has gone on here is so utterly disgusting. Because it means nothing. The fact that hate marches are filling our streets week after week, even in the light of an atrocity that took place which has no political meaning. I can't begin to emphasize enough to you, it's such a somber and serene day, Yom Kippur. These were worshippers on their way to the synagogue for a day of reflection and prayer. It's not a political thing. Judaism is 5,000 years old or more. So for them to be targeted in this way was just old-fashioned Jew hatred. And then the disgusting people who take to the street, conflating that with what's happening in Israel, a country that didn't want this war anyway and was itself the victim of a genocidal atrocity, is so disgusting. And we have a prime minister who's simply not getting a handle on this.
Angela, lots of commentators will say that it should be possible in our democracy to separate people's views and legitimate criticism about Israel and Israeli politics with an understanding that Jewish people should absolutely be respected, protected, that there is no excuse at all for any sorts of violence or discrimination against Jewish people. But do you think that distinction is just too esoteric? It just gets lost in our politics, and particularly on social media, that it's frankly an impossible distinction?
It's an impossible distinction. First of all, if you look at some of the polling, and I'm involved in a lot of Jewish groups, I read a lot of sort of community places on social media where people exchange views. Although some people may have legitimate criticism of the Israeli government, which I completely understand, the large part of the Jewish population in this country are fundamentally Zionist in the sense that they recognition the right of the Jewish people to self-determination and to their ancient homeland, hopefully living side by side in peace with a secure Palestinian state as well. And so the idea that this extremist came out yesterday morning, driven by what? Was he either driven by pure hatred? We know the Hamas the Hamas agenda is to wipe all Jews off the map, not just those in Israel. Or is it that anti-Semitism is a light sleeper, and the events of October 7th have given all those who hate the state of Israel and hate Jews some kind of legitimate way of fielding their argument? The fact that it's so utterly disrespectful to take to the streets the day after this happened. But if you cast your minds back, there were protests and marches the day after October 7th happened in London. Our streets have become, in areas, Jew-free zones. But I just want to say one other thing, though. I'm deeply patriotic. I believe in this country, and I believe in the really good, upstanding, fine people who make up the large part of this country, as witnessed by the volume of messages that have come in from non-Jewish friends, colleagues, people I haven't heard from in years, who just want to live peaceably and don't see a place for this kind of heinous extremism in our country.
Yeah, Angela, that has been the case in Britain for many years, but not so much anymore, unfortunately. No. Thank you so much for joining us, Angela Epstein, their journalist.